Welcome everybody to Byte with EVS Commerce. We bring curated AI and digital transformation stories to all our audience regularly from different parts of the world and different industries. Today we have Joseph Lewin from Proofpoint Marketing. He's the director of demand generation, where they create different types of marketing strategies to help tech companies, manufacturing companies, and professional services companies build customer relationship at scale. Is that correct, Joseph?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Thank you for joining us, Joseph.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's going to be fun.
So, Joseph, one of the things which we would like to understand from you is this: a lot of people get confused between lead generation and demand generation. There are too many theories floating around, and people do get confused. How would you define demand generation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different approaches that you could take to describing the difference. But I would say one of the primary differences is that lead generation is really focused on marketing being primarily a sales support function. So, I've typically seen that where you have a sales leader that's in charge of marketing, and they're taking marketing from the approach of how do we get more conversations with our sales team. And even though I agree with that thought process overall, as far as getting the sales team more conversations, that's really the goal. I mean, if you don't have sales and your sales team isn't having more conversations, then you're not going to have a business. But the challenge with focusing on lead generation is that you end up getting a lot of people in your pipeline that aren't actually interested in buying. So then your sales team spends a lot of time trying to connect with and trying to follow up with people who are either not interested in buying at all, or they're focusing on trying to shop you for price. And if you are the lowest cost option and you want to, you want price to be the thing that you're going to compete on, maybe that's not the worst strategy in that case. But for most of the customers that we work with, they don't want to be the cheapest option. They don't want to be competing on price and just constantly dropping their prices to beat out the competition. So in that case, you kind of have to take a different approach. So demand generation is really focused a lot more on building your company's reputation, building your brand. So I would almost see it like a magnet. Lead generation, you're like chasing people around, trying to grab them, but demand generation is more like, you're trying to create this magnetic content that attracts people to you, content that makes people go, man, this company is great. They're great to work with. I know that they understand what they're talking about. They understand our industry. They understand the challenges that we're facing. And you can get people to have all of those thoughts about your company through the types of content that you create, and by consistently showing up where people are spending time and delivering content or starting conversations with them that really help them do their jobs better and more effectively. So demand generation is much more focused on building your brand reputation and positioning your company and the leadership and your team as experts that could really solve problems for your customers.
So great one. I like the analogy where you said that when you're talking about lead generation, you're trying to chase your customers, and demand generation is like having this amazing magnet where you pull customers towards you. So how do you make this shift from lead generation to demand generation, especially for the traditional manufacturing companies, which is the less glamorous part, not like the tech counterpart, but amazing products and huge ticket size and quite set in their own ways. So how do you make this shift from lead generation to demand generation?
Yeah, I mean, I just having worked in a company that was focused heavily on engineering and like digital transformation, and working with companies that were trying to launch these big transformational programs, not in marketing per se, but large transformations. What I learned from that industry is that when you try to change things too quickly, you're almost guaranteed to fail. So if you are currently, like, if you're starting fresh, then, yes, start with demand generation. I think it's going to be better and, give you a lot more fruit in the long run. But if you're already running a lead gen strategy, my recommendation wouldn't be to just like totally cut what you're doing and start something brand new. It's figuring out a way to start as small as you possibly can and start proving something out and building a case for it. I mean, if you're the leader of your company and you can make whatever unilateral decisions that you want, it's a slightly different story, although you still need to get the people in your team on board. even if you have the authority to make the decision, it doesn't mean people are going to follow through. So that's where, no matter what your role is in the company, starting small and proving it out and piloting something, I've seen that be a lot more effective. But really, demand generation all comes down to understanding your customer, which to me is the foundation of all good marketing, is really knowing who your customers are, what their pain points and problems are, what keeps them up at night. Then, how are they currently solving this problem? Is it with a competing solution, or are they solving the problem that you solve by just ignoring it and dealing with the problem? Or and if you really understand what your customers are looking for and what drives them beyond, most of the time there's a driver beyond cost. Is it they need to save time, they need to look good to their customers, they need to look good to their executive team. There's usually something deeper you can get to than just like cost. And if you can get beyond the pricing conversation and figure out what's really truly driving people, that's when you can create marketing that attracts them. Because if you understand the problem that they're experiencing better than they do, and you can describe the problem better than they can, then they're going to just automatically trust that you have a solution for that problem. And there's going to be some credibility there. So then when you start then sharing about your solution and how it helps them to solve that problem, you're much more likely to win them over. So demand generation to me always starts with customer research and understanding your customers.
Yeah. So agreed. I mean, one of the things what you just said is don't unsettle what is already out there. Let that continue. In parallel, you build something which you want to, and have your small experiment so you could prove those things. So if somebody wanted to make this shift, what could be the fastest or simplest or the quickest way to showcase some impact? Is there a playbook, or is there any particular, if you had to suggest a few things, how would you guide somebody on, making that impact to showcase that, yes, this is something which needs to be pursued in terms of demand generation?
Yeah. And I'm not trying to talk around your two questions, because I know my first question was maybe like my first answer there is actually the piece that's foundational, but it's not it doesn't give you a type of content that you would create, or a playbook. I think part of the challenge with answering that question directly is once you start doing that research, you're going to learn more about your customers and figure out where they're spending time and what those challenges are. So the type of content that you create is a lot of times really driven by what you learn in those early customer interviews. But just to give an idea of what I've seen be effective. I mean, I run a podcast myself. My company has a podcast. We work with our customers and starting podcasts. So that's definitely, if you're really bought into the idea and you go, hey, I'm okay with this taking 9 months before I start seeing revenue come in, then starting a podcast, I think can make a huge difference. But I think the first things that you have to do to switch from lead generation to demand generation are less about the tactical things and more about your strategic approach to marketing and in your mindset. So what I mean by that is demand generation is saying, hey, we need to add so much value to our prospects outside of our solution that they want to do business with us, that we're the solution that they are wishing that they could work with, even if they can't currently do it. So that whenever the opportunity comes up, they're coming to us and saying, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about you guys. I've been wanting to work with you for 2 years, and whatever, I didn't have the budget for it, or I didn't have the internal buy-in, or whatever, but now I finally get to come work with you guys. What is it going to take to get this going? Like, those are the kinds of conversations you want to be having, and
Yeah,
that
you would love
demand
those.
generation can help you with, right? So it's switching your mindset from going, okay, we need to just get whoever we possibly can in front of our sales team, whether they're qualified or not, whether they're interested or not, and let's like pound the market as hard as we can with promotional things and talking about our product and talking about our services, and so that we can capture people who are ready to buy right now. You have to switch away from that mindset and think of the way you measure marketing differently. So if you're measuring marketing off of how many conversations you're sending over to your sales team, that are like ready to buy right now, we'll just say sales qualified leads. If that's your metric that you're measuring off of, it's going to be a little bit challenging to see those kinds of results early on, because you're building your brand, you're building your reputation, and it takes time to build your reputation in the market. It takes time to establish leaders in your company as being an authority in your space. That's not something that today nobody knows who your company, who you are, or they don't really know the things that differentiate you. They don't know who your leadership team is, or who the different people are on your team. You're not just going to tomorrow all of a sudden have everybody in the market go, oh my gosh, this company's amazing, I want to work with them. It takes time. So some of the things you want to switch your mindset towards are not just focusing on influencing decision makers, but influencing other people in the space. And so those could be people who influence your influencer internally, like your buyer internally. So those could be people that work for the buyer. It could be the decision maker's boss. It could also be colleagues or peers to your buyer that you're influencing. It could be industry leaders that whose opinion your buyer would care about. So those are all people that you can influence with demand generation, whereas lead generation is usually focused purely on like who the buyer is themselves. But who are you more likely to listen to? Are you more likely to listen to your friend who's gone through a similar experience before, a peer, or are you more likely to listen to a company's marketing department or their sales department? Much more likely to listen to a colleague and ask them first, right? And get their opinion, or to go to your boss and ask them if they have an opinion, or go to your subordinates and ask them, for their opinion. That's where people are going to go first. So if you've already influenced all those other people around the buyer through marketing content, then when that person goes and says, hey, does anybody know of a solution for this? They're going to start hearing about you from multiple different people in multiple angles, and it just makes the sale so much easier. So I know I'll pause there, and we can go a little bit deeper into the tactical side, because I know that's kind of where you're trying to go with it. But I'll stop monologuing for a second, because I think setting that idea up is important to actually be able to talk about specific tactics.
Agreed. I think what you rightly pointed out is the trust that comes with the colleagues or your friend or your network is way more than any marketing or sales department can create. So when like you rightly said, this is a long this is it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And obviously as somebody who would have to start this, it's a huge shift from what the company has been doing. You'll have to justify those costs, those time investment to the senior management, especially in times of recession. So how do you do that? Because this needs time, this needs money, this needs resources. So how do you bring in that shift, what you just said? How do you justify that shift?
Yeah, I mean, if I was in the position internally to try to be driving that change, some of the things I'd be asking first to my leadership team is, how did you make your last purchase of a major, so a major expense? What did you do to make that purchase? And let them explain what they did. Did they make that purchase because some random salesperson called them 25 times until they picked up. Possible, highly unlikely, and I do
Highly
know that
unlikely, I agree.
I know it happens. So I'm not going to say that it's impossible, but highly unlikely that that was how they made their previous purchase. And then, did you download an ebook that led you um, to talk to an SDR or a BDR or some, brand new, fresh out of college salesperson that qualified you before they sent you on to an account executive who then, qualifies you some more before they actually answer any of your questions? Again, chances are that is not how a senior leader made their decision. And if they did make their decision that way, it's not because they wanted to. It's because they'd already asked everybody that they could. They already tried to find a solution in a different way and they couldn't. So then they had to go through the sales process, of downloading an ebook and talking to an SDR and, kind of being passed down the chain. So the reason I'm saying that is more than likely, especially if you say, okay, well, how about the last 2 or 3 purchases you made? Almost guaranteed they're going to say, okay, well, I talked to a couple of my colleagues, I talked to some other people on the executive team and they had worked with this other company in the past, or, they had heard about this company on a podcast and they appreciated what they had said in this interview. It might be worth reaching out to them. And, that's how they got the conversation started. Or, they were on LinkedIn and they've been following somebody and they've been seeing their content and, that kind of led them to reach out for a purchase. So there's all kinds of different ways that they would answer, but typically it's going to be more influenced by their peer group, influenced by other people that they actually have relationships with to make the purchase, not just going to download an ebook. The reason I'm saying that is that gives you the ammunition to say, you didn't make your previous purchase the way that we're trying to make our customers make purchases. So, why would we do something different? And their argument might be, well, we're seeing success in this, but then, you have to start actually looking at the numbers and saying, okay, how much success are we having? We're having whatever, out of every 100 ebook downloads that we get, we have 2 people that are interested in talking with sales. And then those people, maybe out of every 10 of those, there's like 2 or 3 that are actually really, truly interested. And out of those, most of them are really just looking for the cheapest option that they possibly can. So, again, if you're looking for people who are going to be trying to drive you down on price and be like very transactional, that could be okay. But if you're looking to build long-term partnerships and you actually look at the numbers, it's not as effective as what your leadership team thinks. So, being able to lay that out and to make a case for how building better quality relationships and having people come to you and influencing the peer groups, I would kind of take that angle first if I was trying to drive change internally.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, using the own purchase behavior as a starting point, that's a great way to land on the point which you're trying making rather than, just putting it across. So let's say one is able to get this piece, one is able to make this shift from lead generation to demand generation, and you start doing this. How do you measure the success in the initial phases, in the later phases? You would like to measure certain key metrics, and there are so many metrics out there. It doesn't make sense to have all of them. From a senior leadership point of view, you would like to have some key metrics which directly impact the business revenue. So, what are those key metrics which one should keep an eye on?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is that the best marketing is extremely hard to measure in a dashboard. That doesn't mean it's impossible to measure it, but it's measuring it more by, the sentiment of your customers, your churn rate, and obviously you can measure churn rate, but it takes a long time to get to that metric, of whether you're lowering lowering churn rate. And then, another metric that I really like is like, are we seeing sales come in faster? It's not necessarily that um, it's not always increasing the amount of sales, but bringing them in faster. So instead of having 18-month sales cycle, if you can cut that down to 6 months or 3 months, ultimately that means more revenue. It also means that you're able to work with a much smaller team, or your team's able to be much more efficient, because instead of trying to land this deal for 18 months, if they're landing it in 6, it's cutting off, tons of time and saving you costs that way. So that's one thing I like to look at. But when you're first starting with demand generation strategies, so let's just say, use the podcast as an example. Like if going the podcast route makes sense and you have the runway to do that, the first things that you look at for the first 60 to 90 days are going to be engagement metrics. And so we're really looking for what we would call message market fit. So in the beginning, we're really just trying to test out, is our audience on the platform that we think that they're on? Is the messaging and the angle that we're taking, is it resonating with them? Is the type of content that we're getting in front of them resonating? Is it video? Is it video content? Are they downloading our podcast? Are they finding us on? We had a little technical difficulty, so I'll pick up where I left off there. So they could be podcast downloads, would be an example of a metric that you would look at early on. Now, is that the metric you want to measure the success of your campaign long term? No, those kind of get more into those, can be vanity metrics, but it's an early indicator that our message is connecting. And so that's what you want to look at when you first launch a demand generation campaign. What we usually focus on first, even before a podcast or anything like that, would be the messaging of the company. So like, what makes your company different, truly different, and being able to describe that in a way that we think will resonate. You do your customer interviews, you work on the messaging first, that's going to be on your website, that you're going to use in sales materials, and taking that angle, and then you test that through paid ads. So if you're testing that through paid ads, again, your first 90 days, you're really looking for, are people first engaging with it? Are they commenting? Are they sharing about? Are they sharing your content? Like one of our customers last week had somebody share their promoted ad, and so if somebody's sharing your ad with their audience and saying, hey, there's a lot of wisdom here, people should pay attention to this, that's a good indicator that the message is connecting with your audience, right? So that's what you want to measure early. And then if it's not working well, then you go, hey, this message isn't working, let's massage that message first and work on it until we actually get message market fit, until our message is resonating. Once it's resonating, then you move on to other metrics that are more get closer to pipeline. But if you try to look at pipeline or revenue in the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you're going to be really disappointed. But that doesn't mean the campaign's not working or it's not going to be effective. It means that it takes time to build, again, your reputation. So then going back to the podcast, you'd be looking at some of those same metrics early on. Then you're moving on to kind of phase 2, which, things that we'd be looking for there are going to be like click-through rate. Are people starting to fill out high intent forms on your website? So like they're reaching out to your sales team on their own. They're choosing to do that. Or, are they going to the pricing page on your website and then filling out a form that says that they want to talk with somebody on your team? These things that are saying they're actually interested in buying and they're filling out a form. So when you're like, once you have your message market fit, you're usually taking another like 90 days to 180 days, depending on your sales cycle, to start measuring some of those in between pieces. Are people starting to be interested in actually talking to your sales team? Are they mentioning your demand generation activities when they say how they heard about you? This is something that's really becoming common in the software space, is to have a how'd you hear about us form field, on your forms that's required. That is a open text field. So people have to fill it out that says how they heard about you. So if they start putting in there like, LinkedIn, or I've been listening to your podcast, or, I saw an ad with this type of messaging and it really resonated with me. If you start hearing those things, those are good kind of middle indicators. And then when you're getting into like your 9 to 12 month range, 18 months, depending on your sales cycle. So if you have like your typical sales cycle is 30 days, it's going to be shorter. You're going to be in that like 8 to 9 month range. But if your typical sales cycle is 18 months and you're expecting to see revenue in 9 months from your marketing campaign, that's silly, right? So, depending on your sales cycle, usually like 9 to 12 months, 9 to 18 months, that's when you're going to start really seeing that revenue impact. So, I know I'm talking for a long time here, but to put a bow on it, your first 60 to 90 days, you're looking at message market fit. Once you nail that, your next 90 to 180 days, you're looking for early activity that's going to lead to pipeline. And your pipeline metrics might not be super strong in that window, but you're going to start to see indication that yes, people are engaging with this content, and then they're choosing to talk with people from our team. And then that 9 to 12 months, that's when you're looking at like revenue, your pipeline and your revenue. And if you take that point of view, you're basically looking for those early indicators that are leading you towards sales. And in the long run, you should be measuring your marketing effectiveness off of whether it's generating revenue or not.
Got it, got it. That sounds quite logical when you term it that way, on how it has, how do you measure this and what are the pieces you look for. That helps really set the expectations right. So you know when to get excited and when to get not disappointed in that way.
Yeah. And the reason to break it down the way, and I'll finish it off with this, is if you try to look for revenue too early, you're gonna kill the campaign before you see the effectiveness. And we've seen that happen quite a few times where people are like, okay, we started this, we decided to go all in on demand generation, and we've done it for 3 months, 4 months, and we haven't seen any revenue, any pipeline generated from it. So now we're going to pivot and do something that's going to generate pipeline. And if you do that, you're going to have just wasted, 3 months or 6 months worth of investment. So that's where we've started to shift to start to look at some of those early indicators first, to say, okay, if we're seeing these things, we're confident that we're going to see the revenue come in, but we have to look at these early indicators first and be focusing on those. Otherwise, we're going to be disappointed and pivot too early before we're actually seeing the results of the campaign.
Got it. So one of the interesting things which I wanted to check with you was, we found this really interesting term on your Proofpoint's website, the relationship velocity framework. Sounds exciting. What is it exactly? How do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like our methodology for helping prospects build relationships at scale. So it's kind of our process for engaging with customers. So it starts with defining. So again, kind of going back to earlier in our conversation, we first have to figure out what challenges your company is facing, where there's gaps, where there's gaps in content. So, if we come in and a company is already running a podcast, they have their team is activating on LinkedIn already, and they're starting to see some value come from that. That's going to be a different conversation and a different strategy we're going to create for them than a company that has, like 2 pages on their website with no content, and they've only focused on like just pure sales outreach in the past and haven't really done any marketing. So first we have to define, okay, where's the company that we're working with at? Then we have to define, okay, who are your customers? Who are your ideal fit customers? And interview their current customers and figure out, why did you choose to go with this company versus, somebody else, and what pain points are they solving for you? And, kind of figuring that out and defining that, doing stakeholder interviews to figure out, okay, what is actually unique about this company? And then we're going to map out. So the second phase of the relationship velocity framework is around mapping out, how are we going to actually reach these people? Like, what's the strategy? Are we going to do a podcast, or we're going to focus on more of this middle of the funnel content, so like things that are closer to sales and that help drive pipeline faster. Then it just really depends on what the needs of the business are that we found in the define phase. So once we map it out, then we go to operationalize, which is, what tactically needs to happen between our two teams to deliver on this. Like, who needs to be involved? What does the process look like? How do we, make sure we can actually deliver on this plan? And then activate is where we actually begin to activate on that campaign, create content, could be launch a podcast, work on their messaging, or launch a relationship enablement campaign, which is kind of where your marketing and sales blend together. And then grow is where we go, okay, here's what's working. Here's what we've learned. Here's what's working. Here's what isn't working. Let's minimize these efforts. Let's maximize these efforts, and, grow the campaign and go from there.
When we talk about the tech companies, I think, we all understand a lot of things about it. So the fascinating part about the supply chain, the manufacturing companies, is other than the direct customers, they also work extensively with their distribution channel, which is their suppliers, their wholesalers, their distributors. And these are, what we have seen, are quite traditional in their approach. They know each other in and out. They have their own trade shows, their conventions. A lot of these activities happen offline. So how does this relationship framework apply to them as well?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I would say you just have to look at your distributors as a customer. So there is, and again, it kind of depends on your business model, but if you're selling primarily or solely through distributors, then the distributor is really your customer. And yes, you need to do things to speak to the end user for sure, but really the distributor is the person who you need to make the most happy. Because if they don't purchase, they don't stock from you, or they don't give you, depending on what's going on, they don't give you shelf space, or they're not going to make you prominent on their website or something like that, then you're not going to make sales, right? So then it's doing the same thing, interviewing distributors and figuring out what is most important to them. And their answers might surprise you. Maybe it is just straightforward things like, well, we need you to actually deliver on time. Okay, well, that's something you need to make sure you're doing.
You do,
and if you're not, and if you're not, then really, honestly, there's not much marketing is going to be able to do for you. You have a different problem. And, but they might say other things that you're not expecting. Maybe they're like, hey, look, our customers don't really care about lead time as much as they care about, whatever, quality, or being able to understand how the product works, and having some educational content. And we get a lot of calls of our customers that are frustrated when, they go to use the product, or they go to implement it, and there's not good instructions of how to do that. And so we have this other this other company that we buy from, and they've got these great videos that go through each one of their products and explain it. If you do research and you learn that, it's like, okay, wow, well, that's an important piece of information. And if you hear that from multiple of your distributors, then you go, okay, well, maybe we should start out with marketing content focused on how to use our product, or how to, if it's a component, maybe it's about how do you actually install this component, or, how does it, if it's engineers buying it, what are some of the specs around that they need to understand, or, some of the process around that, and then making that accessible for your distributors to put on their website, or for them to communicate it or send it off. So seeing your distributor is almost like a customer, but also even like part of your sales team, because they're really, in a sense, both of those at the same time, and making sure that you're equipping them with the content that they need. So, the type of content that you create for a distributor might be different, but the idea is still the same. You need to research and understand what challenges are they facing, what's actually really important to them, why are they buying from you right now, why are they buying from your competitors? And if you can really understand what they're looking for, then you can create the right kind of content to fit their make their job easier, essentially. And if you do that, then you're gonna win.
Got it. Another important aspect, which typically people don't focus on, and that's across industries I've seen, is the brand. While a lot of efforts and initiatives go into the lead generation, which we have always seen, and later on, like we spoke about demand generation, because the relevance what it has in today's world and how the buying behavior is, focus on brand often gets neglected. Not that people don't want to focus on it, but it's there at the back of your mind that let me take care of this, then this, and let me just focus on the brand later. How important do you think, or how important have you seen the impact of brand in this relationship velocity framework? Or maybe in any of the customer experiences you are seeing?
I mean, if you have a brand is like even more important when you have a sales team that's actually doing cold outreach. And the reason for that is they're more likely to get their calls answered and returned, and they're more likely to get their emails responded to if you have a really strong brand reputation. So, like, if I get a cold email from HubSpot, and this has happened in the past, I'm going to answer that because I know who HubSpot is. I've used their product before. I like them. I've benefited from their content and their courses before. I'm going to answer them, whether it's actually a good fit or not. I'm going to respond, and I did. And Wistia, it's a video hosting platform. I had sort of used their product before. I was very familiar with them, and they reached out to me through cold outreach, had a great personalized email, and I responded. Would I have responded to that cold email if it wasn't Wistia? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not, though. I mean, it's because Wistia had already established their brand reputation with me, and so I responded. Even at it, it's almost like out of courtesy for all the effort they'd put into building a relationship with me in the past, and it gave them the opportunity to share their product and pitch their product to me when they wouldn't have before. The problem on the opposite side is when you focus too heavily on lead generation and just cold outreach without building that brand reputation, you're actually doing the opposite. You're basically like taking your cold outreach or lead generation where you're following up in a way that people don't want you to follow up with them. I think that's the big problem is like you download an ebook and you get a call from the sales team or you get a cold email. You're like, I wasn't really interested in sales. I was just interested in whatever this topic is. So, if you're calling it and it's irrelevant, you're actually like spending your brand equity in a sense. You're taking money out of your brand bank account and you're spending it right now and it's gone. And if the person's ready to buy, it was money well spent. For the 99 people out of 100 or 98 out of 100 that weren't ready to buy, you spent that money and it's gone. And then what happens next time you go to get in front of that person? You don't have any money left in your brand account to spend. And they're like, see ya. I'm not interested. You guys annoyed the crap out of me for months and months and months a year ago, and I'm not interested in working with you anymore. I'd rather go to your competitor who didn't give me that experience. Whereas on the flip side, if you've added a ton of value to them up front and you've been building this relationship with them, you've had conversations with people on their team that weren't sales conversations, they were just helping them out, adding value, giving something to them that made their job easier. Instead of spending that brand money, you're investing it and it's multiplying and that equity is growing. So then in the future, when you do actually reach out and ask, or they come to you, you haven't spent your brand equity. You've actually like invested it and your investment has grown. And now you have this established brand that people just automatically trust when they relate with you. So I would say it's pretty important.
Yeah, and the long lasting effect with the HubSpot story which you just shared, I believe every marketer can relate to it. My career progressed thanks to HubSpot blogs. I've been reading them for so many years, and the courses, especially the inbound certification. And yeah, right, I mean, it's something which you are right. If I receive a code email from HubSpot, I'm definitely give it a read. Even if I don't respond to it, I know that this is what I'll look into it. Right. So yeah, that's beautifully put. One one last bit which comes to my mind is how much of the digital change or digital transformation is part of this framework or whatever you consult the your customers are. I mean, while a lot of things are moving digitally, you have your online webinars, online conventions, emails, and everything. How much of a digital transformation within marketing or outside of the marketing to ensure that there is a fulfilling or satisfying experience? How much of digital transformation is part of it? I don't know if that's question relevant. It's just something which came to my mind.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, most of the time, the companies we're working with are like small to medium sized companies. We do have some companies we work with that are a little bit bigger. So digital transformation definitely looks different in an enterprise that has, less than 1,000 people or less than 500 people than it does, at a Fortune 50 company or something. So, it's a little easier to transform digitally when you're a smaller company, just because there's a lot less moving parts, a lot less people involved. But I wouldn't call myself a digital transformation expert. But what I have learned is digital transformation has to be human first. And if you try to take a technology first approach to digital transformation, it's very, very, very hard to be successful. And a lot of times it's going to end up failing. So you have to understand people and how they're going to interact with, you know, the product, which in this case is, let's say it's demand generation marketing, more digital focused marketing, leaning away from the more traditional things that they're used to. If you can't get the sales team on board for doing that, you're going to lose. And if you can't get your leadership team bought into the idea to where they're truly going to invest in it, you might as well not start the project, because you're going to look worse getting halfway through and then not actually having the buy-in that you need. And then same thing for your prospects. Like, you have to understand what they're actually looking for. So maybe that means a mix. Maybe they are showing up at trade shows, and that is an important place for your company to be. I would argue maybe not spending the money on a booth, but just go interact with people and record in a podcast episode with somebody that's there. There's lots of ways to be at these events and be a lot more engaging and have better conversations than just like standing behind a booth. But, in any case, it might be a blend. It might be, they might want to talk to a salesperson earlier on in the process in some of these, manufacturer distributor relationships. And so you have to understand that. You have to really do the research up front and understand how humans are going to interact with the digital space, and then create an experience around that. Create marketing content around what people are actually looking for. And if you do that, you're going to be successful. And I think that's really at the heart of demand generation versus lead generation is, what do people actually want? What are they looking for? What's going to help them do their job better? How can you integrate in what they're already doing so they don't have to go way out of their way to understand what you're doing or to work with you, and just making that process as easy as possible. And I don't know if that answered your question.
No, you did, and I think if we had to summarize it, I like the fact that you put it as human first, because you're right. I mean, any technology that you bring in, it's all about change management. And I think the classic case which you mentioned is about the salespeople. If I can get the most advanced CRM in the world, if my sales team isn't convinced on how it will help them do their jobs better, it's going to be a half-baked product which is out there, but nobody in the sales or marketing team is using it. It's pointless, right? So you're right. It has to be human first. So, and one last thing before we call it a day. So you have your own podcast, the strategic marketer, and you know you have worked across multiple roles. Then you moved to this, and you do guide and coach a lot of small companies. If you had to give them one message to somebody who wants to start with B2B marketing, or to a small company who wants to get into B2B marketing the right way, on how buyers buy, what would you tell them? How do they get started?
Yeah, I don't want to like just sound like a broken record, but customer research and starting with that is absolutely vital. Because if you don't understand what people are actually looking for, there's no way that you're going to create a message or even a product. Like, let's even just say you don't have a product yet. instead of starting out by designing this huge product or this huge offer and building it all out and spending the money on it and buying equipment so that you can manufacture that product, make sure that people actually want it. Make sure there's a need and that you're solving it, and figure out a way to start as absolutely small as possible and deliver the most minimal viable product that you can, and get feedback early, and then learn from that and make it better and improve it over time. And that's true with marketing as well. So like, you could start out by interviewing either your current customers or people that are in the space on LinkedIn Live, and just getting conversations started with them. And the more that you're talking with people that are in your industry, in your target market, in non-sales ways, you're going to start to learn what's actually moving the needle for them and what their challenges are and what they're facing. And then if you're doing it on LinkedIn Live, you're giving them free press, so there's like value in it for them, but then you're also getting these insights that you wouldn't get in any other way. And just whatever you can do to have as many of those conversations early on in the process as possible. And then if that's going well, then turn it into a podcast and go, okay, we're already doing this. Now let's just do the post-production on the back end and turn it into a podcast and YouTube videos, whatever else. But I think starting with those early conversations and then trying to turn those into content that you can use is the fastest way to start.
I think I have run out of all my questions, Joseph. So before we wind up, would you like to just talk about your podcast, The Strategic Marketer, on what do you do, how what are the kind of topics you cover, so our audience could get to know more about it.
Yeah, so my podcast is focused on B2B marketers who are looking to level up in their career and understand different areas of marketing better. So I mean, to me, to be a strategic marketer, and to get outside of like being told by somebody else, here's the tactics you need to go do and deliver on them, and instead bringing strategic value to the company, which is how you're really going to move forward in your career. You have to understand not just your one little narrow area, but you have to understand all kinds of different areas of marketing. So I interview people that are on the paid media side. I interview people that are content marketers working on SEO. I interview people who are, founders of their company and agency owners and even salespeople. And the reason for doing that is that gives a much broader idea of how all of these different pieces can connect together. And unless you understand how all the pieces connect together, then you can't really be strategic. And that means even understanding business principles and some of the like lingo and business lingo that your executive team will be using outside of marketing. So trying to interview people that can bring all of their expertise together and yeah, I learn from it every week. So it's as much a learning opportunity for me as it is anything else. So come join in the party and check out the show.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks, Joseph. Thank you very much for joining us today. I mean, it was lovely to have somebody who could talk about so many different things, especially like I said at the start, demand generation in terms of the whole manufacturing and other areas, which I personally feel are highly neglected for I don't know what reason, or maybe being a tech marketer, I am hanging out at the wrong places and listening to the wrong channels, maybe could be. But yeah, that really helped. So anything from you,
Yeah, well, thanks so
Jovita?
much for having me on the show. This is fun.
Thank you. I will